You're jealous of your brother, my mom whispered over my birthday cake. Then let him pay your. She never finished the sentence. Maybe she didn't have to. The words sat there, heavy in the air between us, more bitter than the melted dark chocolate frosting slowly pooling on the cake I'd paid for. Down to the last detail. I didn't blink, didn't flinch, just looked at her the same way I might look at an old spreadsheet gone wrong. Quietly, with restraint, but inside, I felt something crack and split with the precision of a seismic fault line. I'm Gisele Bündchen. I don't strut down runways or live in designer gowns. I'm a 32-year-old financial strategist at Orion Capital, based in Austin, Texas. The version of me that exists online looks pristine. A clean portfolio, a polished LinkedIn profile, and a modest apartment in Hyde Park where the mortgage is paid on time. Every time. But that night, sitting in the glow of luxury candlelight at a restaurant I'd dreamed about for years, I realized something devastating. I had become my family's silent accountant, emotional insurer, and all-purpose fixer. And the only birthday wish anyone cared about wasn't even mine. Let's rewind a little. I'm the eldest of two. My younger brother, Matteo, is 27, charming, magnetic, and somehow still unemployed. Our dad left when we were teens. I was 15. He was 10. Mom never remarried. She gave everything to us. But not equally. I became the self-sufficient one. Matteo became the adored one. It didn't feel imbalanced at first. I was good at math, organized, calm under pressure. While Matteo struggled with structure, I thrived in it. While I was filing FAFSA and balancing my first tax return, Matteo was skipping lectures to fly to music festivals. No one batted an eye. I graduated top of my class, worked 3 jobs to cover college without loans, and got hired straight out of UT by Orion Capital. First as an assistant, then as an analyst. I worked through weekends, skipped vacations, and watched as my savings grew slowly but surely. My life was careful, strategic, sometimes lonely, but it was mine. Meanwhile, Matteo dropped out of college in his 3rd year after realizing it wasn't aligned with his spirit. He went through 7 jobs in 5 years: bartender, content creator, creative consultant, dog walker, crypto coach, sales at a boutique that no longer exists, and a brief stint trying to launch a podcast that never aired a single episode. Mom always made excuses for him. She said he was still finding his lane. My lane was already paved, maintained, and taxed. It started small, a few $100s for his rent, a phone bill that had to be covered just this once, a streaming account, then 2, then 5. One night, he called in tears because his car had been repossessed. I wired over $1,200 without thinking. It wasn't about the money. I told myself. It was about family, about being there. But over time, the balance shifted. What was meant to be occasional support became a permanent system. I was the backup generator every time his life short-circuited. And while I stayed quiet, everyone stayed comfortable. By the time my 32nd birthday rolled around, I had covered over $36,000's worth of his expenses across the last 2 years. That doesn't include the birthday and Christmas gifts, the joint family vacations he couldn't afford but still attended, or the interest accumulating on the credit card I let him use in case of emergencies. Emergencies that somehow included wireless earbuds and concert tickets. Still, I wanted one night to feel like mine, so I made reservations at Elysia, the kind of place you had to book 3 months in advance. I paid the deposit, planned the menu, and even ordered a custom cake with hazelnut cream and orange zest, my favorite. I thought maybe this time, just this once, it would be different, that Mom might acknowledge what I'd held together for so long, that Matteo might show up on time, sober, and maybe even remember to say thank you. He didn't. He arrived 40 minutes late, with his girlfriend Naomi in a sequined blazer and heels worth more than my car insurance. They laughed through my toast, ordered the most expensive wine, and when the bill came, he theatrically patted his pockets and grinned. "Sis, you got me. Right Venmo, you tomorrow." Then came the cake. The whole table sang, candles flickered. I made my wish in silence. That was when Mom leaned in, still smiling for the camera, and whispered the words that detonated something inside me. "You're jealous of your brother." And just like that, I knew the truth. I wasn't just tired. I wasn't just stressed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't storm out. I simply smiled, set my fork down, and poured myself another glass of the wine I'd paid for. Mateo was halfway through telling Naomi about a possible collaboration with someone he met at a kombucha festival when I looked at him and said, calmly, "You'll be paying your own bills starting tonight." The table went silent. Naomi blinked like she hadn't quite heard me. Mom froze, still holding her phone mid-swipe. Mateo laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't. I repeated it, word for word, this time a little slower, so there'd be no confusion. Starting tonight, Mateo, every bill, every subscription, every transfer. It ends now. I didn't wait for them to respond. I stood up, walked to the host stand, and handed over my card before the waiter even brought the check. I tipped generously, not for their benefit, but because the staff didn't deserve the tension they'd had to serve alongside the truffle pasta and dry aged steak. I walked out of my own birthday dinner without a backward glance, heels clicking on polished tile like punctuation marks on a chapter I had just decided to close. I could hear my name behind me. I didn't turn. Not when Mom called it in that sweet but sharp tone. Not when Mateo tried to follow me with his hands half raised. Caught between confusion and entitlement, I kept walking until the cool Texas air hit my face and the buzz of the restaurant was replaced by the low hum of the city I'd worked so hard to thrive in. Back at home, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I opened my laptop, lit a small candle on my thrifted console table, and started the process I should have started years ago. First, I opened my banking app. I navigated to recurring payments and found the line that had become as familiar as my own name. Highland Heights Apartments, Mateo Rent. I clicked cancel. A pop-up asked if I was sure. I was. The utilities came next. Electric, gas, internet, one by one. I transferred the accounts back to his name, screenshot every step, and saved them in a folder labeled Release. Spotify family plan gone, Netflix removed, Apple Music deleted. His number had been linked to mine on nearly every subscription I used. I hadn't noticed when it started. I definitely noticed now. It was past midnight when I reached the credit card account. I had added Mateo as an authorized user 2 years earlier when he needed emergency help for his freelance expenses. Since then, he had racked up just over $5,200 in charges. I hadn't seen a single repayment. I called the issuer, waited on hold for 18 minutes, and requested a removal. The representative asked if I wanted a new card reissued for security. I said yes. The moment I ended the call, I felt something shift in my chest, a small exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. The next morning, my phone lit up with notifications, 23 missed calls, 41 text messages, 8 emails. Mateo had gone from "what's happening to you can't do this" to just this last month in under 8 hours. Mom's messages were more layered. She alternated between guilt-tripping and thinly veiled threats. "You embarrassed him." One text read, "I hope you're proud of yourself." Another simply said, "This is not what your father would have wanted." I didn't reply. Not while I was still fragile enough to be pulled back into the familiar dynamic of overgiving and under-receiving. I brewed coffee in silence, pulled out my budgeting spreadsheet, and opened a new tab, one by one. I cleared the rows labeled Mateo. It was shocking how much space he'd taken up, not just financially, but mentally. When I tallied the totals, my hands went still. Over the last 2 years, I had funneled $36,870 into his life. Rent, car payments, groceries, emergencies that weren't really emergencies. And yes, birthday dinners and gifts that were supposed to make up for something that had never been missing in the first place. Love had always been there. Boundaries had not. That afternoon, I called my financial advisor, Monica, and booked an emergency session. I needed help restructuring my savings. She listened without judgment when I explained everything. Her voice was calm but firm. You've been operating like a second parent. That's unsustainable for your finances and your future. She helped me map out a recovery plan. It wasn't going to be instant, but it was going to be mine. That night, I made a second call. Not to Mateo, not to Mom, to a therapist named Dr. Nguyen, whose specialty included family enmeshment and financial boundaries. I scheduled an intake session. My voice shook, just slightly. When I explained the reason for my call, she didn't sound surprised. "You're not the first person to get trapped in a pattern like this," she said, "but you can be the first in your family to break it." The next few days passed in waves. Sometimes I felt liberated. Other times, I felt hollow, like I'd severed a limb I was still used to carrying. But every time I almost doubted myself. I opened the folder on my desktop labeled Release and reminded myself exactly what I was freeing myself from. I expected silence. I expected resentment. I didn't expect Mateo to show up at my office building 3 days later, unannounced, pacing in the lobby like he was owed an explanation. Sophia from the front desk called my extension mid-meeting, her voice uncertain as she explained. "There's a man here, says he's your brother, says it's a family emergency." I excused myself from the quarterly portfolio review and walked to reception, my heels clicking more deliberately than they had days earlier. Mateo looked out of place. His shirt was wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, hair a mess that hadn't seen product or purpose in at least 72 hours. The smell of old cologne and stale energy drinks hit me before he opened his mouth. "You cut everything," he said. "No greeting, no acknowledgement, just accusation. Electric's getting shut off. My landlord's threatening eviction. I can't even use Uber anymore." His voice echoed in the polished marble lobby. A few clients looking up from couches near the coffee bar. I didn't flinch. I lowered my voice instead. "This isn't the place. Mateo, let's step outside." He didn't move. "You can't just do that without warning," he said. Louder. "I was depending on you. You didn't even give me a chance to fix it." I took a breath, then spoke with a calm that surprised even me. "You had years of chances. This wasn't sudden. It was overdue." Security started drifting toward us, not aggressive, but present enough to make their point. I nodded to them, a small gesture to de-escalate. "You're an adult." "Mateo, adults pay their own bills." He shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You're really going to let me get evicted over some spreadsheet I didn't bother correcting the irony?" I simply said, "I can send you some resources for rental assistance programs and job boards, but I'm not your financial safety net anymore." His face flickered, first with disbelief, then anger, then something I hadn't seen in a long time, fear. He left without saying goodbye. I returned to the boardroom. The meeting resumed. The markets didn't notice the seismic shift in my personal life, but I did. That night, I had dinner alone at a small bistro I used to love before budgeting for 2 lives made it feel indulgent. I ordered wine, without mentally calculating how it would affect my ability to cover Mateo's internet bill. The grilled salmon came perfectly crisp. The side salad dressed just right, for the first time in months. I tasted food instead of swallowing stress. The messages from Mom came in waves. At first, concern masked as confusion. "Are you all right? Why did you leave your party like that?" Then came the guilt. "You humiliated your brother. He was just trying to celebrate you," followed by fury. "You've always resented how close we are. Don't think I don't see it." I didn't reply, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I had too much. Anything I sent in that moment would only pull me back into the old pattern. So I waited, let the storm burn out without stepping into it. Therapy with Dr. Nguyen started quietly, mostly questions at first. She was soft-spoken, observant, and never seemed surprised by anything I said. "You've been cast as the responsible one," she said in our second session, "but that role often becomes a trap. You're not allowed to have needs or limits." I nodded, surprised by how much that stung. We talked about my childhood, how I'd started working at 16 to help with groceries, how I'd sacrificed dorm life and commuted to UT so Mateo could have the full college experience, How birthdays and holidays always became about him, even when they were supposed to be about me. How love in our family often came with a price tag, and I was the only one paying it. Over the next few weeks, I began to notice small changes. My apartment felt different, calmer, cleaner, like it had been holding its breath along with me and could finally exhale. I repainted the bedroom, bought a new set of sheets in deep forest green, and framed a few of my favorite travel photos. I started meal prepping again, not out of necessity, but as an act of care for myself. Lauren, my best friend, noticed the shift before I even said anything. "You look lighter," she said over coffee one Saturday. "Did something happen?" I smiled and simply said, "I finally turned off the faucet." What I didn't say was that I still checked Mateo's Instagram once in a while, that I still felt a pang of guilt when I saw Naomi posting selfies at brunch, or when I overheard Mom at a family gathering on speakerphone calling him my sweet boy. Struggling so much. But the difference now was that I didn't act on those feelings. I let them exist without letting them run my life. 2 weeks after I shut everything down, Uncle Roberto called me out of the blue. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. He was my dad's younger brother, quieter than the rest of the family, the type of man who observed more than he spoke. I picked up on the third ring, already bracing for a lecture, but his tone surprised me. I heard about the birthday dinner. He said, "And I just wanted to tell you, I think your father would have been proud." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so long trying to be the glue that kept everything from falling apart that I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Roberto told me that even when we were kids, he had noticed the imbalance, how Mom gave Mateo more room, more protection, more affection, and how I was expected to always manage things without complaint. "You didn't imagine it," he said quietly. "You just lived it longer than most people would have." That conversation stayed with me for days. It became a tether I didn't know I needed. Validation. Not as revenge, but as recognition. It reminded me that just because I had walked away didn't mean I had walked alone. At work, things started to shift too. My colleagues noticed I was more present, less frazzled, quicker to laugh during meetings. Jessica, who sat next to me in our open office plan, leaned over one afternoon and said, "You've been eating lunch again. Real lunch, not just almonds and spreadsheets." I smiled. I had started packing real food again. It felt small, but it meant everything. It meant I had space to care for myself again. Then came the email from Mateo's landlord. The subject line was formal, but the message itself was heavy. "Mr. Mateo Lopez has listed you as his emergency guarantor on past rental applications. He is now 3 months behind on rent. Would you like to settle the balance or be removed from future legal communications?" I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. "Remove me from all financial ties. I will not be covering any amount. This has been made clear to Mr. Lopez directly." I hit send with a calm that would have felt impossible a month ago. The next day, Mateo's eviction notice was posted. I didn't find out through him. I found out through Naomi's Instagram, where she posted a cryptic story about fake family and letting people sink. The image in the background showed boxes piled in a hallway, a folded gaming chair sticking out from one of them. I didn't respond. I muted her account. Mom, on the other hand, responded immediately. She called me 12 times that day and left a voicemail that started calm and quickly spiraled into fury. "How can you sleep at night knowing your brother is about to be homeless? He's not built like you. Gisele, he's not strong like you." That last part landed like a brick. It wasn't meant as a compliment. It was a justification for why Mateo deserved more, and I deserved less, simply because I could take it, because I always had, but not anymore. That evening, I met with Dr. Nguyen again. We went over the voicemail. Word for word, "Strength," she said, "is not an excuse for unequal treatment, and love is not a license for endless sacrifice." I nodded slowly. It was starting to sink in. Finally, after years of emotional erosion, just because someone else was struggling didn't mean I had to carry the full weight of their consequences. Mateo wasn't a child. He was a grown man who had made choices, repeatedly, and now, for the first time, he would have to live with them. 3 days later, Lauren and I went to a Sunday market in East Austin. It had been a while since I let myself enjoy something so simple without feeling guilty. We sipped iced coffee, browsed handmade ceramics, and laughed at nothing in particular. I bought a small clay dish, hand-glazed in olive green, and decided it would hold my car keys by the front door. Later that night, as I set the dish in place, I realized something. No one had used my apartment without my knowledge in weeks. The spare key, which I had once given Mateo just in case, had sat untouched in my kitchen drawer. I hadn't needed to check the fridge to see what was missing. I hadn't wondered why my speakers were out of place. I hadn't found my charger mysteriously gone from the nightstand. My space was fully mine again, and it was quiet. The kind of quiet that isn't lonely but whole. Then came the text message, short, unpolished, no emojis, got a job at Mercado Retail, stocking and logistics, not glamorous, but it's something. I stared at the message, heart thudding once before settling. There was no ask, no request, just information, a fact. It was the first time Mateo had messaged me without needing something. I waited a few minutes, then typed, "That's good. Mateo, I hope it's a start." I didn't say more. I didn't offer help. I didn't offer congratulations I didn't feel. But I sent a response, and in that moment, it felt like the right kind of middle ground. I didn't expect a second message, but 2 weeks later, it came. Shift lead next month. They're training me on inventory. I think I'm actually good at it. I read it while walking to the elevator after a long day at Orion. The sky was still faintly lit, the kind of pale blue that only lasts a few minutes after sunset, soft and strangely reassuring. I didn't respond right away, not because I was punishing him, but because I was finally allowing space between someone's effort and my reaction to it. When I did reply, it was simple. That's a solid step. Keep going. There was no emoji, no invitation to catch up, just a single sentence meant to acknowledge movement without reopening a door that had taken so much strength to close. Meanwhile, Mom stayed silent. Not an accident. Not a fluke. It was strategy. Her silence was always louder than her words. The last time she'd tried calling, she left a message that began with, "I don't recognize you anymore. I hadn't returned that call." She was right. In a way, she didn't recognize me, because for the first time, I wasn't behaving the way she expected. I wasn't absorbing the family stress like a sponge or fixing what Mateo broke before anyone else even noticed. I was living, eating, sleeping, breathing without having to reroute my finances or my schedule to account for someone else's instability. She wasn't used to me being unavailable. That discomfort was hers to manage now. It was around this time that I got my first bonus since the boundary shift. Not just financially, but emotionally. A quiet evening in my apartment, alone with a glass of white wine and a good book. No notifications buzzing, no credit card alerts, no late-night calls asking for just one more bailout. I ran a hot bath, lit a lavender candle, and listened to an old album I hadn't touched in years. It felt like meeting a version of myself I'd shelved for too long. I didn't realize how much of my identity had been shaped around being someone's crutch until I wasn't anymore. At therapy, Dr. Nguyen noted something that stayed with me. She said, "When people say you've changed, they usually mean you've stopped behaving in a way that benefits them." It wasn't said bitterly. It was said plainly, honestly, and it unlocked something in me. For years, I'd confused love with sacrifice, as if the more I gave up, the more I proved my worth. But all it did was enable others to avoid accountability. The version of me who made spreadsheets for Mateo's expenses, who called utility companies on his behalf, who paid extra on family gifts just so he wouldn't be embarrassed. That version had been generous, yes, but also exhausted, and quietly eroded. Spring crept into Austin slowly that year. I took longer walks, joined a local ceramics class on Saturday mornings, started saying no to non-essential projects at work. Lauren noticed I was smiling more. I hadn't realized how tightly I used to hold my jaw until I saw pictures of myself laughing, mouth open, completely unguarded. I went out to dinner with old college friends I hadn't seen in ages. One of them, Melissa, told me, "You're glowing." Like, actually glowing. "What's going on?" I gave her the short version. "I stopped paying for other people's mistakes." She laughed, then stopped. "Wait. Are you serious?" I nodded. "Completely." Some nights, I still felt echoes of the old guilt. It was like muscle memory. I'd see a missed call from Mom and brace for impact. I'd open my banking app and reflexively check for activity that wasn't mine, forgetting that Mateo was no longer tethered to my accounts. But those moments became fewer, like a distant radio station slowly fading out of range. Then one day, as I left the office, I ran into Mateo in the parking garage. It was pure coincidence. He was dropping off something for a delivery job near downtown, and our paths crossed near the elevator banks. He looked different, thinner, older, but there was something else too, something quieter in his posture. He didn't try to hug me or make a joke. He just nodded. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I replied. For a moment, we stood there in the late afternoon haze, the hum of city traffic behind us. "I've been keeping up," he said, looking me in the eye. "Rent's on time. Groceries, too. Got a used car. Paid for it myself." He paused, then added, "It's not much, but it's mine." I nodded. "That's what matters. We didn't say more. We didn't need to. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was something real." 3 weeks after running into Mateo, I received an invitation to Aunt Lucia's anniversary dinner. It wasn't unusual for her to host these gatherings, but this was the first one where I hadn't been asked to help cover the catering or bring a large format wine. I didn't reply right away. I wasn't sure I wanted to go. Family dinners had become battlegrounds for subtle power plays and selective memory, and I had no interest in walking into another round of "Why are you being so cold to your brother?" But something told me this one would be different, so I went. I brought a modest bottle of wine and nothing more, for once. I arrived on time, but not early. No one expected me to set the table or coordinate the dessert trays. I found a seat near the end of the table, not the center, and for once, I was okay with that. To my surprise, Mateo showed up 30 minutes later. He wasn't wearing anything flashy, no designer jacket or borrowed watch, just a pressed shirt, jeans that actually fit, and a neutral expression. Naomi wasn't with him, from what I'd gathered. They had split a few weeks prior. Her Instagram was now full of yacht photos and soft launches with someone who wore too many rings and probably lived in Miami. Mateo didn't bring her up, and I didn't ask. When dinner was served, the conversation flowed easier than I expected. We talked about movies, work, even old childhood memories that didn't sting anymore. At some point, Uncle Roberto raised a glass and said, "To survival, not just the dramatic kind, but the kind where you reclaim your peace." I met his eyes across the table. He nodded once, slowly. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I'd ever get in public. Later that evening, in the quiet space between coffee and cake, Cousin Anna leaned over and whispered, "So you really cut him off like—" "Completely." I nodded. She exhaled, then said, "Honestly, I think a lot of us were waiting for someone to finally do that." I didn't respond. I just let the weight of that statement settle. It made me realize something I hadn't considered before. The entire family had been tiptoeing around the Mateo dynamic for years, accepting Mom's narrative that he was fragile and deserved more patience. But beneath that, people had noticed. They'd watched me carry the bulk of the family burden while pretending it didn't hurt. And while most of them hadn't said anything out loud, it didn't mean they hadn't felt it. After dinner, as people milled around the kitchen and boxed leftovers, I stepped outside for air. The night was cool. The kind of early spring breeze that reminded you winter was truly gone. Mateo followed me out after a few minutes. He didn't say anything right away, just stood beside me, hands in pockets, watching the porch light flicker slightly. Then, in a voice that felt quieter than I remembered, he said, I used to think you just liked being in control, that you were obsessed with money, structure, spreadsheets. But I get it now. I looked at him, not speaking, just letting him continue. I didn't see what it was costing you, what it was doing to you. He paused, then added, I took advantage of you. Gisele, you didn't deserve that. The words didn't fix everything, but they landed differently than any apology I'd received before. There was no manipulation behind them, no promise to change if I'd just help one more time. It was simply an acknowledgement. And for that moment, it was enough. I'm figuring things out, he said, kicking a small rock with the tip of his shoe. It's slow and ugly sometimes, but I'm not expecting anyone to clean it up for me anymore. I nodded. That's what matters. The next morning, Mom called. I let it ring. Then she called again. Eventually, I picked up. Her voice was formal, stiff. I heard you went to Lucia's. I said yes, nothing more. I heard Mateo spoke to you. Another pause. He says he's trying. I stayed silent. Then she added, You're still angry with me, aren't you? I took a deep breath. I'm not angry, I said. And I meant it. I just stopped accepting crumbs and calling it love. There was a long silence. Then she said, You're being very dramatic. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it proved how little she'd changed. Maybe, I replied, but I'm also being honest. That conversation didn't end in resolution. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the years of imbalance or her role in perpetuating them. But for the first time, I didn't need her to. I wasn't waiting for validation. I had already given it to myself. Spring turned to summer slowly in Austin, and with it came a subtle but steady reshaping of my life. It wasn't dramatic. There were no fireworks, no social media announcements, no sudden job promotions, just small shifts that, when stacked together, made the ground beneath me feel sturdier. I replaced my living room rug with something lighter, softer underfoot. I donated old clothes that no longer felt like mine and replaced them with fewer, better-fitting ones. I bought a new set of dishes, not expensive, but ones I had chosen deliberately. Instead of inheriting from clearance bins and hand-me-down boxes, it felt like reclaiming my own taste after years of accommodating everyone else's preferences. Therapy sessions with Dr. Nguyen evolved from damage control into something deeper. We moved beyond family dynamics and into patterns of self-worth, how I'd learned to equate love with usefulness, and how hard it was to feel deserving when I wasn't actively fixing something. She pointed out that saying no wasn't just about resisting others, but also about retraining how I responded to my own sense of obligation. It hit me harder than I expected. Somewhere along the way, I had become addicted to being needed, even when it drained me completely. Letting go of that role felt like losing a part of my identity, even as it also set me free. At work, I stopped volunteering for extra projects that didn't align with my career goals. I started using my vacation days. I even said no to a weekend leadership summit that would have looked good on paper but felt unnecessary for where I was headed. Instead, I booked a solo trip to Santa Fe. I wandered through adobe galleries and watched the sun dip behind orange cliffs in silence. I ate chile rellenos at small diners and slept in without checking emails. It was the first time I'd taken a vacation that wasn't timed around someone else's crisis or a strategic family obligation. It was just for me. That simple fact made it sacred. Mateo texted occasionally, not often, just enough to keep the thread from snapping. He shared small updates, finished my first inventory cycle without errors. Or, my boss says I'm consistent. There were no requests, no hidden agendas, just brief windows into a life that, for the first time, he was building with his own hands. I didn't overreact. I didn't reward. I simply responded when it felt appropriate. I let the space breathe. Then, one Friday evening, he sent a message that surprised me. Signed up for a night class, Intro to Financial Literacy. Figured it was time to learn the stuff you've been trying to teach me for years. I stared at that message longer than I expected. Not because I didn't believe him, but because a part of me still wasn't used to this version of him, the one who moved forward without dragging me behind. That weekend, I met Michael. He was the younger brother of a long-term client, visiting from Denver for a charity fundraiser. We were introduced over a conversation about local theater and nonprofit work, and something about him felt instantly different, grounded, curious, not performative. We talked for hours that night, and when he asked to see me again, I didn't hesitate. On our third date, sitting under string lights in a quiet backyard wine bar, I told him the entire story, about Mateo, about my mom, about my birthday. I expected him to flinch, or change the subject, or try to fix something, but he didn't. He just listened. When I finished, he said, "Boundaries aren't selfish. They're necessary. I learned that from my sister. She had to cut off our cousin after years of chaos. It was the hardest thing she ever did, but it saved her." I felt something ease inside me at those words, not because I needed approval, but because I finally understood I wasn't alone. Other people had lived this too. Other people had reached their limit and walked away without turning bitter. Other people had learned that loving someone didn't mean losing yourself in the process. I wasn't broken for needing peace. I wasn't cruel for protecting it. A few weeks later, Mateo sent another message, thinking about applying to the assistant manager track. "It comes with more responsibility, but I think I'm ready. Just thought you'd want to know." I didn't respond right away. I reread the message once, then again, before replying. "Proud of you. Keep going." Autumn arrived early that year, crisp and golden, casting long shadows across the sidewalk outside my building. I had just wrapped up a quarterly performance review when I saw Mateo's name flash on my phone. No emojis this time, no vague messages, just a clear sentence. "Are you free to meet next week? I'd like to talk. In person." I stared at it for a long moment, then replied, "Wednesday, 4:30, neutral place. Your pick." He sent the name of a quiet cafe between our neighborhoods, the kind with mismatched chairs and homemade lemon cake. It felt like the right kind of middle. The following Wednesday, I arrived early, as I often do. I picked a seat near the window and ordered coffee. No cream, just like always. Mateo walked in 10 minutes later, alone, dressed in simple work clothes, a navy polo and jeans, his hair freshly cut, his expression unreadable. He sat down carefully, like someone entering unfamiliar terrain. For the first few minutes, we talked about neutral things, work, the weather, traffic. Then he reached into his bag and pulled out a small folder. "Don't worry," he said before I could ask. "It's not a request." Inside the folder were printouts, his updated budget, pay stubs, course registration for community college classes in business administration. He didn't walk me through it like a pitch. He just set it down, hands folded, and said, "I know this doesn't undo everything. I just wanted you to see what I'm working on." I flipped through it slowly, each page clean, organized, annotated in handwriting I hadn't seen in years. He had enrolled in night classes, using his job to qualify for tuition assistance. He'd opened a savings account. He'd even made a spreadsheet color-coded. I closed the folder, took a breath, and said, "You didn't have to show me this, but I'm glad you did." He nodded, then looked down at the coffee in his hands, fingers wrapped around the cup like it anchored him. "I owe you more than an apology." "Gisele," he said, voice steady but low, "I took advantage of your love. Not once, not by accident, but again and again. I made excuses, and Mom made it easy, but it was on me. I was the one who drained you. I didn't interrupt. I let him speak. You saying no was the most loving thing anyone's done for me, because for the first time, I had to become someone who could stand on my own. It was horrible, and it saved me." I felt something shift then, not because he finally acknowledged the truth, but because he did so without expecting anything in return. No plea, no tears, just a clear recognition that the life he used to live had been built on someone else's exhaustion. "I'm proud of what you're doing now," I said, "and I'm also protecting what I've rebuilt. So if you're looking for reconnection, it has to come with respect." He nodded. I'm not asking to go back. I'm hoping we can go forward. When we left the cafe, he insisted on paying the check. It was a small gesture, but his hands didn't tremble when he handed over the cash, and he didn't ask if I had Venmo. We walked in separate directions afterward. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. That night, I lit a candle in my living room and sat quietly. No TV, no background music, just the soft hum of peace I had earned. I opened my laptop and updated my monthly budget for the first time in over 3 years. Every line belonged to me alone. A week later, Mom left another voicemail. Her tone was clipped, more defensive than usual. Your brother says you two had coffee. I'm glad you're speaking again. Maybe now you can reconsider helping him with Christmas expenses. He's been through a lot. Gisele, we all have. I didn't respond. I had learned not every message needed an answer. Some truths were better left unspoken, especially when they hadn't changed. Mateo had grown, but she hadn't, and I no longer mistook biology for belonging. Instead, I called Lauren and invited her to join me for Thanksgiving at a small rental cabin I had found online, tucked in the hill country, far from old routines. She accepted without hesitation. We cooked together, played card games by the fire, and hiked through trails that smelled of cedar and moss. No drama, no obligations, no sense of being squeezed into someone else's mold. It was the first holiday in years where I didn't wake up with anxiety. On the drive back, I thought about the version of me from last year, the woman who had whispered I'm fine while carrying the weight of a whole household on her back. I no longer recognized her, and I didn't want to, not because she was weak, but because she deserved better. And now, finally, she had it. December arrived with its usual weight expectations wrapped in tradition, obligations disguised as sentiment. In previous years, the holidays had felt like performance art. I was the one who organized the Secret Santa list, confirmed the head count, booked the table, and quietly covered the cost gaps when others forgot their wallets or offered to Venmo but never did. This year, I did none of that. I didn't suggest a theme. I didn't take charge. I watched the family group chat buzz with questions and vague plans, and I stayed quiet. I wasn't angry. I wasn't avoiding. I was just done pretending that orchestrating other people's comfort was a requirement of love. Then, 3 days before Christmas, Mateo sent me a short message. I'd like to host this year. Nothing big, just dinner at my place. I'll take care of everything. At first, I thought I misread it. I waited, half expecting a second message asking for a small contribution or reminding me to bring wine. But nothing came, just the invitation. It took me an hour to reply. If you're sure, I'll be there. He responded with a thumbs up. But something told me he meant it. Christmas Eve came quiet and cold, the kind of dry Texas chill that makes your skin tighten but not quite shiver. I pulled into the modest apartment complex Mateo had recently moved into. It wasn't glamorous, but it looked clean and well kept. The exterior was lined with simple string lights, not overdone, just enough to suggest someone had tried. I knocked once, and he opened the door immediately. The apartment smelled like something had been cooking all day: rosemary, garlic, a hint of lemon. There was music playing softly, not holiday jingles but instrumental jazz. On the small dining table sat mismatched plates, a few votive candles, and a basket of warm rolls. He had made roast chicken with roasted vegetables and homemade cranberry sauce. There was a store-bought cake on the counter. I tried to make one, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, but it came out like concrete. So I pivoted. I laughed genuinely. Not politely. Store-bought is fine, especially when you're not asking someone else to pay for it. He didn't flinch at the comment. He smiled slightly. Yeah, that version of me is done. The rest of the evening was strangely peaceful. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't dissect who had been wrong, who had sacrificed more, who had carried what. We just ate, talked, sat in the comfortable quiet that only comes when no one is performing. Halfway through dessert, he disappeared into his bedroom and came back with a small box, wrapped in plain brown paper with a navy ribbon. It's not much, he said. "And it's not a bribe." I opened it carefully. Inside was a frame. Within it, a photo I hadn't seen in years, us as kids, sitting on the curb outside our childhood home, eating ice pops in the summer heat, both of us grinning, legs dusty from the park. I looked up at him. "Where did you find this?" He shrugged. "Cleaned out a box from Mom's garage. Thought it belonged with you." Something in my chest ached, not in a painful way, but in a full way, like an old room being aired out for the first time in years. "Thank you," I said. "Seriously." He nodded, and we didn't speak for a moment. The silence wasn't awkward. It was safe. He walked me to my car later, hands in his jacket pockets. Posture relaxed but grounded. "I know we're not there yet," he said quietly, "but I'm glad we're not where we were." I nodded. "Me too." On the way home, I thought about how this entire year had unfolded. I had entered it at my breaking point, quietly drowning under the weight of unspoken expectations and the cost of other people's comfort. I had walked out of my own birthday dinner with 30 years of resentment clenched between my ribs and a single sentence that changed everything. Then let him pay his own bills. At the time, it felt like self-preservation. Now, it felt like clarity. The next morning, I hung the photo Mateo gave me in my entryway, not because I missed the past, but because it reminded me that change is possible when it's chosen, that people grow when they're finally allowed to fall without someone rushing in to soften the landing. That love means nothing if it requires self-erasure to be sustained. I never brought up the birthday again, not with Mateo, not with my mother, not with myself on sleepless nights, digging for reasons. But sometimes, I thought about it in passing how a single sentence, whispered over a cake meant to celebrate me, ended up being the last straw. "You're just jealous of your brother," my mother had said, as if that explained everything, as if years of quiet labor, of unpaid emotional taxes, could be dismissed with one lazy, convenient label, "Then let him pay your bills." That was my reply, and it had changed everything. A few months after Christmas, I got an email from my mother. Not a phone call, not a visit, just a simple message titled "Update" inside. She wrote that she was selling her condo, downsizing. She had found a one-bedroom closer to her church friends. She mentioned Mateo had offered to help with the move, and that he had even taught her how to make a basic monthly budget. There was no apology, no reflection, but also no request. I stared at it for a moment, wondering how I felt. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel angry. I just felt clear. That chapter was done. It didn't need a grand finale. Around the same time, I received a promotion at work, Director of Organizational Strategy, a title I had quietly chased for years but never felt allowed to pursue fully because of everything happening at home. I celebrated in my own way. A quiet dinner with Lauren, a weekend trip to Big Sur with Michael, who had slowly and steadily become a constant, not because he swept in to save me, but because he never asked me to shrink. We didn't toast to revenge. We toasted to alignment, to clarity, to peace that didn't ask to be earned through suffering. One Saturday morning, while watering my balcony plants, I got a text from Mateo. Just a photo, a certificate, Community College of Austin, Associate of Applied Business. Beneath it, a short message. "Thanks for letting me figure this out the hard way." It worked. I didn't reply immediately. I set the phone down, made coffee, watched the light move across the floorboards of my apartment. Then I wrote back, "Proud of you, truly." It wasn't performative. I meant it. Later that evening, I found myself going through an old digital folder labeled Family Stuff. Inside were scattered screenshots, voice memos, receipts I had kept for years, probably out of habit, or just in case I ever needed to prove how much I'd done. I clicked through them one by one, the Venmo transfers, the grocery lists, the photos of broken appliances I had replaced quietly. Then I deleted the folder, not out of anger, not to erase the past, but because I no longer needed proof. Proof of what? That I had given enough, that I had been fair, that I had deserved better. I already knew the answers. and the people who needed to understand that either already did or never would. Either way, it was no longer mine to carry. A few weeks later, I passed by a bakery that reminded me of the one from that birthday, not because it was fancy or nostalgic, but because it had a familiar smell. I stepped inside, ordered a single slice of lemon lavender cake, and sat at the corner table with a tea. I didn't check my phone. I didn't take a photo. I just sat there, letting the moment be what it was, a quiet kind of celebration, private but powerful. As I walked home under the fading afternoon light, I thought about how easy it would have been to turn cold, to build a life on walls and distance and cynicism, but I hadn't. I had simply chosen myself, not out of spite, but out of clarity. I had stopped explaining my worth. I had stopped negotiating with people who only heard what they wanted, and somehow, that made space for the kind of life where love wasn't transactional. The next morning, I woke up to sunshine streaming across my sheets, the city still humming beneath my windows. I made a list of things I wanted to do that day. None of them were for anyone else. None of them required me to carry someone's weight. It felt strange. So yes, once upon a time, over a birthday cake meant to celebrate me, my mother whispered that I was jealous of my brother. And maybe I had been for a long time. Not of his mistakes, not of his chaos, but of the freedom he had to fall apart without consequence, of the softness he received by default, of the protection I was never offered. But not anymore, because now, I wasn't angry, I wasn't broken, I wasn't waiting for anyone to see me differently. I had seen myself, I had protected myself. I had become the version of me that didn't require permission to exist fully, and that, I've learned, is a better ending than revenge ever could be. Have you ever had to choose peace over family? What did it cost, and what did it give back?